Well, I think we'll start by the time we get through a few of the formalities and stuff, and you late stragglers will have a minute or two more to catch up. So thanks everybody for another couple hours of your time. Joined tonight by Rich Weir and Rory Fogarty. The guests you're muted. You can raise your hands. You can put questions in the chat box, and we'll kind of hold questions till the end. It works better than trying to interrupt in the middle. Then we'll unmute you so you can ask your questions. It just keeps the background noise down for everybody else, and make sure there's no feedback and that sort of stuff by doing it this way in a webinar format. So I come to you from the township of Langley in the unceded territory of the Matsqui, Kwantlen, Katzie, and Semiola First Nations. And I'm also proud to carry on the trapping traditions of Canadians, and granted the privilege to trap the unceded territory of the Insa-Luk territory outside of Boston Bar. So with that, I'll pass it to Rich. Maybe Rich, for some of those that are new, you can introduce yourself and Rory, and I'll pass you control. You've got a presentation again, I'm assuming. So
we do, yeah.
I'll let you take her from here.
Okay. Well, thanks, Tim, and thanks again for the invite to come and talk about kind of what we're doing with the Fisher program here in with Ministry of Environment. So my name's Rich Weir. I am the carnivore conservation specialist in the conservation science section of the Ministry of Environment in Victoria. I work on fur bearers kind of throughout BC. Have been doing so for the last 30 years or so. So many of you probably have seen me or heard of me somewhere along the way. And Rory Fogarty is works with me as well in the conservation science program. He's the Fisher conservation biologist for BC, so he gets to do all sorts of fun stuff specifically with fishers. So he's going to talk today a bit about some of the work he's doing, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the other sciencey kind of stuff that we have on the go here with the Ministry of Environment. So what I'm going to do is I'm just doing this brief introduction kind of about the Fisher Science Program. We got a bunch of different work that we've got ongoing to do with learning more about fishers, being able to better understand fishers and fisher populations in the province. And we're going to go into that a little bit today. So Rory's going to be doing most of the talking because he's doing most of the population monitoring and work across the province. So that's kind of his little niche of things. But I'm going to do a little bit talking in a bit about some landscape kind of planning work that we've got underway that's hopefully going to help a lot, not only for fishers, but also for other fur bearers on your trap lines. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Rory, and Rory's going to need to grab the screen control, and then you can.
Good to go.
You're good to go. Yeah.
Okay. Oh. It is disabled for me.
1 second. I think I have to pull the control and give it to you, actually. Oh. Okay, there. Now try sharing your screen.
Yeah, you betcha. Okay. So that should be the full slideshow there now.
Yep, we see your full screen now. Perfect.
Excellent. Great. So as Rich mentioned, my name is Rory Fogarty. I work with him at the Ministry of Environment as the Fisher Conservation Biologist. I would like to just say thanks so much for having us today. I am technically based in the Victoria office. However, I'm currently presenting from the traditional territory of the Tk'emlúps-te-Secwépemc First Nation, also known as Kamloops. And today I'm just really here to give an overview of some of the fisher monitoring work that we've been doing the last 3 winters, as well as some other mesocarnivores, and just to go through where we were doing the work, you know, what we found out, and kind of go from there. So just as an overview, the current, obviously understanding the current fisher population is a high priority for us and for fisher population trends, given the recent population estimates. And fur bearers in general haven't necessarily been monitored all that rigorously in the past. And so we've been initiated non-invasive detection surveys for fishers in 5 different areas in central BC over the past 3 years. And these methods also allow us to identify key factors that may be influencing the distribution and abundance of fishers in these areas. And many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with these types of methods. In the top frame here, you can see that's just a triangular wooden cubby that we use for our hair snagging. It's baited with chicken and lure in the middle. There's a little roof over top to protect any hair samples from degrading. And then both ends are left open, and glue strips are fastened to the ends of those cubbies. And when the fisher or the martin or the animal goes in, leaves us that hair and that associated DNA on those strips, and then we can collect that and get a lot of information from that. And then, of course, in the lower frame is just your standard trail cam. Again, most of you will be familiar with this. And really, the camera data, it just takes it continuously. It's usually pointed at some bait, a chunk of beaver or something like that, something that's going to get stinky. And so, these are the 2 main methods that we're using, these non-invasive methods to monitor fishers and martins and other mesocarnivores across the province. And so here are our 5 survey areas that we were able to tackle in the last 3 winters. And some of these areas were chosen because they are areas that were where we had previous surveys or previous fisher projects on radio telemetry and that. And then some of them were chosen because we really don't have any good population data for those areas at all in the central interior. And so the map shows the 3 fisher habitat zones: boreal, subboreal, and dry. And as Rich presented last week, the new genetic evidence really shows that we do have those 2 populations, genetically distinct populations in BC. And so this monitoring, given the red listing and the low population estimate for the central interior unit, these areas are all contained within the range of that population. And so the Chilcotin and Bonaparte was done in 2018-19. The Williston Basin was done in 2019-20. And then this past winter in the Enterprise Fisher area or Fisher Survey area and the Amanika. And so what I'll do is I'll go into details in each of those survey areas and give you some more info here. So this is the Chilcotin survey grid. The northern boundary is bounded by Sadove Mountain in the west and Nazco Lake Park in the east, and the southern boundary extends from Chancellor Lake in the west to Alexis Lakes Roads in the east. And so you can see in the center, that's Puncie Lake. And this area was chosen. We have it overlaps with a previous radio telemetry study done by Larry Davis in 2005-2008 with fishers, as well as a pilot hair snagging survey that was done as well in the kind of the southwest corner of the grid. So what we did was we established 122 fisher survey cells. Each of the cells was 20 square kilometers, which approximates the smallest expected female fisher home range in this region. And each of these survey cells had a site in it and were monitored over 4 sessions between December and March for a total of 256 hair snagging sites that we set up, with 1 site active per cell per session. And what we did was we accessed the sites by snowmobile and snowshoes primarily, and the sites were relocated within a cell once at least to help distribute that sampling effort evenly. And given the previous work that took place here, we had an inkling that we were expecting to find a relatively high number of fishers. This area has been shown to be quite productive as compared to the rest of the central interior of BC. And it's just based on those previous studies as well as historical fur harvest data. So we were expecting to find a few fishers in this area, which is also part of the reason why it was chosen. And at the same time, a paired survey grid was on the Bonaparte Plateau. You can see in the center of the map there, that's centered on Bonaparte Lake. so north of Kamloops. And this is a smaller field crew that was working at the same time. And they, similar survey procedures, exactly the same, hair snaggers, same size survey cells. And they were able to set up 45 unique hair snagging sites in their grid over the winter. And again, with the same sites being relocated at least once in the cell to help distribute that sampling effort. It was also chosen that these are the same biogeoclimatic zones as the Chilcotin survey area. And again, this was really designed to gain some more information. This particular area is near the southern extent of fissure distribution in the central interior. And so it was going to be really interesting to see what we were going to get from our detection surveys here. And so we collected 464 hair samples in total. All of these hair samples were sent to Wildlife Genetics International in Nelson, BC. They specialize in microsatellite DNA analysis. So they are able to identify not only species, but for the chosen species, actual individual animal ID. So the majority of the samples came from that Chilcotin study area, 386, with 78 from the Bonaparte. The majority of those samples were from fishers, as you can see in the graph. Although there was some marten, we had 21 marten from the Chilcotin and 22 from the Bonaparte, and a handful of these other species. And once we got the results back from Wildlife Genetics, we actually identified 50 unique fisher individuals between the two survey areas, 16 males and 34 females in total. Again, the majority of the fishers we detected as expected in the Chilcotin survey area. And we only actually had 2 fisher individuals identified, 1 male and 1 female in the Bonaparte. So in the Chilcotin, we had 15 males and 33 females uniquely identified. And using that genetic information, using that individual ID for animals, we're able to do some pretty cool stuff in terms of generating densities and distributions and abundance of animals in that survey area. So this here is a map of the Chilcotin fisher detections from that winter. And what you're seeing is the sites that unique animals were identified at. So each has a unique identifier. So F22 would be female 22. And you can see that she was identified or detected at these 2 sites over the winter. And then the pathway in the middle is just the recapture pathway. And so when we do the analysis, we are able to use that recapture information, and that's how it helps us generate a density for fishers in this particular survey area. And so once we did that, once we ran that, we ended up getting a density of approximately 18 fishers per 1,000 square kilometers in the Chilcotin survey area. Now, it is important to note that density is patchy, that was not uniform over the whole study area. And there were certainly holes based on habitat. And again, we're still working through a bit of the analysis, but what we're hoping to do is find out which habitats those fishers are living in and use that information going forward. And so the following winter in the Williston Basin, so west of the Williston Reservoir, which is just on the west side of the Rocky Mountains and north of Prince George, we once again used non-invasive hair snagging detectors in this survey grid to try and detect both fishers and martens. We were able to establish 70 fisher survey cells. The survey cells are slightly larger than the ones that we used in the Chilcotin, and that's due to the larger female fisher home range size in this area of the province. And so within those fisher survey cells, we actually nested 2 clusters of 20 each marten survey cells. And the marten survey cells were just 2¼ kilometers squared, and that's just reflective of the smaller home range size of marten. And so that ended up being a total of 106 genetic detectors deployed. And this is a study area where we had previous radio telemetry information. Rich had fishers collared up here between 1996 and 2000. And so that was part of the reason that we chose this area. And at that time, he had generated a density estimate of 8.8 fishers per 1,000 square kilometers. So what we were expecting for this area, given that our study grid was approximately 2,000 kilometers, should have been about 17 or 18 or 19 fissures detected throughout the winter. So what we actually found, and you can see on the map here, we were able to collect 207 hair samples from 84 monitoring stations, 69 out of 106 survey cells. And based on color and pattern, the crew's suspicion was that we had fissures at 16 survey cells and marten at 62. And what we actually found, once we had once again sent our samples to wildlife genetics, was that we had only identified 3 fissure individuals, all of them female, and all of them in significantly different parts of the grid here. And unfortunately, because we did have so few fissure detections, we can't really generate a density estimate. But as I mentioned, given that the previous density estimate was just about 9 per 1,000 square kilometers, what is significant is that there's quite a drastic decrease in the number of individual animals that we were able to find during the survey. Now, we do have the marten information, and the 47 marten samples were assigned to 37 individuals, 21 males and 16 females, and we are going to be able to provide some information on marten density, habitat, or environmental factors that are affecting where martens are located within the survey cell, and that's an analysis that's going to be taking place over the coming months here. So we're excited to see what that's going to look like, and we'll be able to provide some further information kind of down the line here. And yeah, so this was just this past winter. I ran a once again non-invasive hair snagging survey in the Williams Lake 100-mile house area. So the northern part of the grid, you can see Williams Lake there. To the east is 100-mile house, and Highway 97 runs kind of along parallel to those boundaries. And then the west side of the grid was more or less bounded by the Fraser Breaks, and then the southern end was about Meadow Lake Road, if you're familiar with that area. Now, this survey area was chosen because we really don't have any good information on fisher populations in the interior Douglas fir, kind of east of the Fraser River. There haven't been any rigorous studies, and so that was the reason that this area was chosen. And once again, it was the same procedures: snowmobiles and snowshoes to access the sites, 4 evenly spaced monitoring sessions. We were able to establish 129 survey cells, each 20 kilometers squared again, and that resulted in a total of 305 unique detector locations set up during the winter. Once again, one survey site per session per cell. So we don't have our results back. We have shipped all of our hair samples to wildlife genetics in Nelson again, and we had 299 hair samples collected, and we suspect fissure at potentially 60 of the 305 sites. So that's a little under 20%. And of course, these won't be unique individuals. These will be these will be recaptures, and some will have been misidentified potentially by crew members. So anyway, we're really excited to see what this brings, given that the fact that we don't really have any good information for this side of the Fraser River. And again, we'll expect those results back in early fall sometime, and then I'll work through and analyzing that data. And again, we'll be able to provide an update kind of next year, probably sometime for you guys. And so this is just a breakdown again, total number of samples collected by suspected species. Again, the majority of them seem to be fisher. We do have a fair amount of marten samples. And then there were some weasel as well, which is interesting. But again, just really excited to see what we get once we get those species confirmed in the fall. And finally, so the Omanika Multi-Species Survey is a joint effort between our partners at the John Prince Research Forest, which is just north of Fort St. James, you can see. And this area, again, aside from within that John Prince Research Forest area, we don't have a lot of data on current population data for sure on fishers in that area, and even extending further west towards the Skeena is another area that we're lacking in some rigorous data. So sorry for the images. These guys just finished up about a week and a half ago, their whole survey. So this is really preliminary data. But you can see Vanderhoof here. So there was a whole bunch of sites by the John Prince Research Forest and north of Highway 16, and then there were some more south of Vanderhoof. And this is just a reference Finger Tetok Provincial Park down here. So the 3 study areas, not including the John Prince, were we set up 82 monitoring stations with cameras and hair snaggers. So they were doing both here. And these were added to the 72 permanent monitoring stations in the John Prince Research Forest. So these sites were visited every couple of weeks. Again, snowmobile, snowshoes, pickup. And right now, again, I've only been sent some very preliminary data, which is looking like 24 of the 154 sites would have had fissures, but only 11 of the 82 without that data from the John Prince Research Forest. The fissure detections were pretty highly skewed to within that boundary. That being said, all of the sites across all the survey areas detected fissures, lynx, wolverine, and marten. So again, really, the camera data does take some time to process, but we should get some really interesting results on the occupancy of the the mesocarnivore community that's in this region. And finally, I'll just bring you back to this first slide showing those 5 study areas. You can tell you that we are planning to do some more survey work this winter. Areas to be decided. I think, Rich, we're going to talk a little bit about and see if anyone has suggestions where maybe there are lots of fishers getting caught on certain trap lines. Anyway, we're just looking to to expand our knowledge of fishers throughout the central interior of BC, hit those areas, some of those areas where we don't necessarily maybe have that great of information. And we actually, our partners at the John Prince Research Forest are currently working on a framework for a regional multi-species monitoring plan that going forward will be able to really allow us to gain even more information about not only fisher populations, but all of the fur bearers and the mid-level predators that we're really interested in. So the development of such a plan, we're hoping to be able to implement at a regional level and really start getting some better monitoring data for not only fishers, as I say, but all of the mesocarnivore guild that we have in central BC. And with that, I am finished up. I think I will pass it over to Rich here, and I'm very happy to take questions at the end here. So please feel free. And once again, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Rory. Tim, if you can let me share my screen, I'll get back onto my presentation, which is a little bit not as exciting. I don't know if it's exciting, but a little bit more kind of long-term-y stuff, less spur of the moment, or not spur of the moment, but kind of active stuff. Okay, so here we are. So what I'm going to talk about is actually a program that we've had kind of percolating in the background for a couple of years, and we're really starting to make some progress on it. And it's called Fisher Landscape Tools. And what the objective of this program is to take kind of all of the information we've got collected over the past 30 years and really put it to help better understand how fishers and fisher populations respond across the landscape to changes to the landscape. Because as I'm sure all of you know, there's been some pretty intensive changes to the landscape that has supported fishers, certainly in the central BC over the past 30 years. So our goal is to get a better understanding of that, take the information that we've got and kind of scale it up to have a better idea of what the population and how the population responds. So I think this is better explained through a kind of a bit of a graphic. So this is the landscape to the west of Quesnel. As you see on the right side of the screen there, that's Quesnel, and the Fraser River running north-south there. In
share screen again, Rich. I don't think we're not seeing your screen right now.
Okay, let's try it again. Okay, can you see it now?
Now we can see it. Yep.
Oh, okay. Well, you missed the first two exciting slides. Sorry. So this is what the landscape. This is kind of a map of the logging that had occurred as of 1970, kind of west of Quesnel. So the gray blobs are kind of recent cut blocks, and there really hadn't been much, as probably anyone who's spent time there knows. By 1980, there'd been quite a bit of forest harvest starting to creep out west of Quesnel, and by 1990 it was moving further and further. And by 2000, there was starting to be some fairly intensive forest harvest in this area. 2010, it was starting to really ramp up, particularly with mountain pine beetle. And then you kind of end up where we are today. And so all these gray areas are areas that have been logged. And fishers, as I'm sure everyone knows, really require forests to survive and reproduce. And they don't do very well when the trees that they need go away to town on a truck. And so this landscape has probably changed quite considerably in its ability to support fishers. And that's probably a real understatement. In large part to do with because of logging. But if you throw the fires in, so this shows a lot of the plateau fire, this landscape has probably does not have the same capacity to support fishers as it did in 1970. And so if Wayne and Levi Kirsch are on the call, on the call, they'll probably recognize this is mostly their trap lines, and there's a reason they stopped getting fishers on their drop lines, and that's because of the logging. I think almost entirely. So the fires certainly didn't help. So what we're trying to do with our landscape planning tool is really try to figure out how the population is going to respond and continue to respond to changes in the landscape. So we know that this type of change is bad for fishers because they're probably not there anymore. But what we're trying to do is really understand how the population responds. And to do that, we need to kind of take what we know about individual fishers and scale it up. So we have a pretty good understanding of how an individual fisher makes its life, does its thing, and survives and reproduces. But turning that into predicting on how the population is going to respond is a whole different thing, and it's really needed to help convince people what the effects of doing all this forest harvest are. Because individually, an individual cut block doesn't probably matter that much to a fisher. But when you put in 14 cut blocks into a 2-year period in their home range, that affects the ability of that fishers to survive and reproduce. And as you do that across the entire landscape, that affects a lot of fishers' ability to survive and reproduce. And that's going to have population repercussions, which is exactly, I think, the main reason that the central interior fisher population is now red listed is because of these massive habitat changes. So what we're doing with our modeling is we make up territories for fishers across an area. So every one of these little red hexagons is a female fisher territory, or it could be. It's about the same size, 20 square kilometers, kind of what Rory was talking about earlier. And you can imagine that a lot of these areas overlap a lot of forest harvest. So a lot of these areas are probably not going to be able to support fishers anymore, particularly something like, up here, which is this entire home range has been logged. There's not going to be a fisher there. I mean, and you don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure that out. But what we want to do is take a look at the areas that might still support fishers and try to figure out how what's left is going to function and how continued degradation of what's left affects the population. So if we, you can't see this too well, but there's some purple, some of the purple, or some of the hexagons are outlined in purple. And those are areas where we think there probably still could be fishers. So not a whole lot on the Kirsch's old trap line, but to the west, there's probably enough there to support some fishers. But is that enough fishers? That blob that's on the left side of the screen, is that enough to support a population of fishers? I mean, there's 30 little 30 or 40 territories there. Is that enough for the population to keep percolating along? Is that enough to sustain itself? And then what about those territories that are stragglers way out in the middle of the doom and gloom of the harvested landscape? how do those animals survive and reproduce, and what are they contributing to the population? And that's really the point of our work, is to try to better understand how the chunking up of the landscape and the degradation of the landscape is affecting the fisher population, both in terms of numbers of animals and its ability to perpetuate itself. So we have some really kind of key objectives that we're trying to get at with this modeling project. The first one is to identify how much is enough. So we need to know how much habitat is needed to support a fisher population over time. You know, are those little chunks of 40 or 50 animals enough? And what happens when that starts to degrade and those little areas become less and less able to support populations? So we need to kind of have an idea of how much is needed to support kind of sustainable populations over time. And part of that is identifying where there's areas of low risk, where it doesn't actually matter if you're logging for fishers. You know, there's probably areas where harvesting of the forest is not a huge deal to the population. And so, you know, we are realists. We recognize that forestry is going to continue, logging is going to continue. So we'd rather have them log in areas that's not going to impact the population less. So that's one of the kind of objectives of this project, is really identify where those low risk areas are. But then we also, the converse of that, we also want to identify where there's high risk areas. So we want to say, you know, don't log this area because, man, this is like the only spot that's supporting this population of fishers is this little pocket here. You know, so it's important for government and planners to know that, because those are kind of the areas you need to stay out of, kind of the areas that would be good to preserve in some respect, because they're really making, you know, an extra contribution to the population because they're so valuable. So identifying those high risk areas is important as well. But kind of wrapping all of this up, we need to make sure there's enough habitat in the future to support the populations. It's not enough to just keep what's there now and hope to high heaven that that's enough to keep things going. And we hope we can accomplish that. We also need to make sure there's enough habitat into the future. So part of our modeling process is trying to figure out over time how population is, or how the habitat in the landscape is going to change and regenerate and retain and recruit those important habitat features that fishers need to have a sustainable population. And it kind of the whole end game of this whole project is a modeling project, is to kind of predict impacts to on the population of proposed developments. So we're really seeing this as a tool to help government and industry planners figure out exactly what the effect of their proposed developments are on the population. Because right now, I think they can just go, well, you know, it's only a cut block. There's only one, there's only two, there's only, it's that, you know, death by 1,000 cuts. Whereas what this is going to do is it's going to measure those 1,000 cuts and show what the effect of those cuts are on the population. And so that's really our end goal, is to be able to better predict how the population is going to change with every single development that's proposed on the landscape. So it's a very ambitious goal to have that happen, or to see that come to fruition. But that's kind of where we're headed. And what we're doing is we're taking this information that we've collected over, you know, the past 30 years of research on fishers. So the radiotelemetry research that's been done, that's what these study areas are, all the hair snagging and monitoring that Rory just talked about. And we're putting all this together to really help us develop some tools that'll help us reach those 5 objectives and be able to better predict how the population might change. Because if we can't tell the decision makers how the population is going to change, they're just going to make their decisions the way they've been making decisions for the past 30 years, which is they don't really consider. But it's kind of our role as scientists is to tell that story and to make it clear to them what the impacts of their decisions are. And I'm not saying that we can expect that they're never going to cut down another tree because of fishers, but they're at least going to know what the effect of that is. And that's really what I see as the key role of a scientist, is to say, this is what's going to happen. And that's what this tool will hopefully do. So kind of the real outcomes that we're looking for, or the key questions we're trying to answer is, you know, how many occupied territories are needed for the population to sustain itself? How do disturbance like logging and fires affect the occupancy of the territory, so where animals are occurring and the configuration of where the animals occur. We also need to consider about keeping the territories connected, because you can imagine if one of those territories blinks out that's in the middle of the, there's no other territories nearby, it's going to be hard for a dispersing fisher to find that territory. Whereas if you've, one winks out in your neighbor's territory, you can move there pretty easily. So understanding that is an important part of the whole modeling process, and understanding how the population functions. And hopefully what we're going to be able to do is target where the landscape developments can occur to have a minimal effect on the population. And I think this is really important because it helps us identify what areas do we protect, which areas do we say, okay, that's probably not going to, it's not your best bang for your buck. Because we, like I say, we realize that forestry and logging is going to continue, but hopeful outcome of this tool is the ability to predict those things and have a better understanding of how the population changes. So I'm just going to show a quick little kind of graphic of some of the work that we've done. So these are some territories that are up in the boreal forest, so in the northeast corner, just south of Tumbler Ridge, or Chetwynd, between Chetwynd and Tumbler Ridge. And what we do is we have some models that we use to predict the relative probability of occupancy. So green are good territories, red are bad territories. As you can see from this image, it looks like probably most of this landscape is not that good for fishers, but there's some good areas. And we try to roll that up into figuring out how many kits are going to be produced each year from those territories, and whether or not those territories are going to be occupied the next year. We kind of roll this all up into a kind of a population change prediction. So we can kind of predict how, given the current state of the landscape and projected changes to the landscape, how the population is going to change. And that's kind of the way we're rolling out this whole thing, is we're using all this data that we've collected over the past 30 years to predict the population response to habitat change across the landscape. So we're all pretty excited by this, and I'm excited because, I've been, like I said, I've been working on fishers for 30 years, and a lot of my data is being used for this. And it's really, we're really hopeful that it's going to help things a lot. You may be wondering, so what does this mean for trappers? We're specifically designing the tools to help people better understand the impact of proposed developments to fisher populations. And we're not going to be just sharing the information with the government and industry. We're going to be sharing it specifically with trappers, so that you can go and when you get a referral to your trap line, a forestry referral for your trap line, you'll be able to say, this is going to reduce the number of fishers on my trap line by 3 or 4 or something. There'll be a quantifiable number you'll be able to take to industry and say, hey, don't log this, because this is what the impact is going to be to the fisher population on my line. And you may not care that much about fishers, but I know that you probably care a lot about martins. And the good thing with this model is that it's not only going to help identify and conserve habitat for fishers, but it's going to really help for martins, because as you probably all gathered by now, fishers like to have trees. They can't survive if there are no trees. Martins are pretty similar in that regard. And if you're saving habitat for fishers across your trap line, that's going to increase the habitat retention for martins on your trap line as well. So we see that this is being really helpful for trappers, not only because we know you care about fishers, but also you want to keep having martins, sustainable population of martins on your trap line as well. So that's what we see as being kind of the key kind of benefits of that. And so that's really what I wanted to just talk a little bit today about, was just a brief overview of this tool. It's very large and requires a lot of modeling and all sorts of data wrangling and whatnot. But we have some real key outcomes we want to see at the end that we hope will be helpful not only for fishers, but for trappers, and for anyone who wants to see sustainable populations on the land base. So that's the nuts and bolts of the talk. I think we've got time probably for questions or comments about either what Rory was talking about or what I was talking about, and I'm happy to take questions. So Tim, I'll let you figure out who gets to ask questions.
Yep, I will go to who's got their hands up. Ryan Cole, looks like you had yours first. Go ahead, Ryan. Oh, there, go ahead, Ryan, and Leela and Wayne Kirsch are on deck.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yep.
Given this, what is the time frame in which you expect this to be completed? And considering the last Fisher talk, there was kind of this, within the 10 years, they'd hoped to have this Fisher rehabilitation plan rolled out. At the rate at which logging is continuing and the exponential growth of their areas in which they're trying to cut, do you think we'll be able to make any significant outcomes before they get the last of the habitat? Because at this point, I don't think Fisher or much of the fur bearers have 10 years to wait, especially like if you consider that one area east of Quesnel there that pretty much has had all of its quality fur bearer habitat either cut or burnt in the last 40 years. I mean, I don't really know what where we're going to save this habitat for these Fisher in a significant amount of time.
Yeah, it's great question, Ryan. And we feel that same urgency as well. Like, we're freaked out, you know, like the Fisher team is really freaked out about how much time we have to get this sorted. Because you're right, you know, the rate of cut has not been slowing down. It's hard to imagine that it's going to. And yeah, I agree. We don't have 10 years to figure this out for Fishers. And so we are kind of pedal to the metal, trying to get this done as soon as we can and get information and products to the people who need to make the decisions as soon as possible. So, you know, we're not talking we're trying to get tools out, you know, not all of them, but certainly the most important ones within a year or so. That's our current time frame. It's depending on funding for us, really, is we don't, this is requires resources. And if we have resources, we can get it done. But if we don't, it's hard. So, you know, I think trappers can help see these things come through by making your voice heard that this is important, that this gets done. So I say that's probably a good way to help. But yeah, no, we're as freaked out as you guys are about this. Like, we really are. There's no two ways about it.
And considering, you know, Fisher is kind of a lesser known species. I mean, especially with the general public. I mean, they probably wouldn't even know what one was standing there if it was sitting in the same room as them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you consider the government's inability to act to save an iconic animal such as our caribou, and the amount of, you know, chasing their own tail and not really producing any significant results in a sufficient time, especially in the preservation of habitat. Do you honestly think they're going to make the same mistake with Fisher, or do you think they've learned their lesson, or are they just going to bow down to industry again?
I hope they've learned their lesson. Some days I'm discouraged, some days I'm not. So I think surprised, even though the public awareness of Fishers is not super high, as you mentioned, I think the government, at least the people that we deal with, have taken notice of this and are recognizing the urgency of the issue. So I think there's certainly within the people that we work with, there is a definite recognition that there needs to be something done sooner rather than later. I hear the frustration with the caribou situation makes it seem like if that happens again, we're hooped, and I hope that doesn't happen. we're trying to do things a bit differently. I think maybe Scott Yeager, who's the FLNRO lead for the Fisher Recovery Program, might be able to answer a little bit better than me. But I think we're doing things differently and trying a slightly different tack, I think, than the Caribou program did. So hopefully we're more successful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, and Ryan and I just, and for everybody, you know, we really do, I think urgency was the right word. Are we going to make a difference? You know, we're trying to do it different. We're trying to be proactive. You know, the normal approach is wait till the thing becomes federally listed, throw resources at it. And we got an email this morning about the last southern purcell caribou herd member dying a few days ago. You know, so that herd's now gone, and that's a damn shame that happens. And anyhow, it affected me. We are pushing for it for our part. You know, we bring science to it, and we make our recommendations, and we try to share our urgency and our concerns with, you know, up the chain of command with passion, sometimes to our own detriment, our own professional detriment. And you know, it's a long game, and unfortunately economic drivers are stronger sometimes than our voices, which is, I think Rich said it earlier, you know, together, us, the public, you know, there is, I think, an increased perception of the need for improved environmental stewardship. I do believe it's recognized, as Rich said, to be determined how that's going to actually change what we do. And I think we all need to keep the pressure on. Sorry, that was long.
No, thank you.
Got me heated.
Wayne and Leela Kirsch, you're up, and Greg Pellerin's on deck.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a few questions, and then Leela wants a couple questions for Rich.
Okay, fire away.
How come after the last 15 or 20 years of complaining about this, how come it has to wait until it gets this far before anybody even starts to listen? And another one about even that 2-day seminar we had here, when we went to the bush and you explained to all the licensees, even on that one block, of what to leave and what not to, you know, what they should leave. And then they go in and log and they took everything that you told them to leave anyway.
Yeah, that is, I share your frustration on that. It's really frustrating when we're trying to provide simple guidance that will make a big difference and will retain habitat, and nothing gets done until, you know, the house is on fire. Really, is kind of the way it goes. Yeah, I'm frustrated as well. I can't. There's no justification for it.
Hi, Rich. It's Leela here.
Hi.
I just want to, first of all, thank you and Rory for all your hard work on the Fisher. We're very passionate about them as well. So we appreciate what you're doing. I just have a couple of comments if there's any other trappers out there listening, and that's to make a complaint with the Forest Practice Board if they feel like their areas are being over harvested. You know, it is a bit of a long process, and even though it was too late for Wayne once we started that, if some other trappers can get on board and make those complaints, you know, they might be heard now. Maybe we set a precedence where, you know, they will get heard, and maybe some areas will be saved for habitat in the future. And another comment I wanted to make is, you know, when we were live trapping Fisher and relocating them to the Washington Cascade Mountains, according to that program, they are very easily able to relocate them. And would that be an option for British Columbia to trap them out of one area, live trap them, and put them in another area?
Yeah, that is an option. We would need to find an area where there's good numbers. That's kind of the challenge. Yeah, I think so. What we found is that the central interior fissures are quite different than the boreal fissures. So we wouldn't want to take fissures from the northeast and bring them down into the central interior, because they're quite genetically different, and they're probably quite evolved slightly differently. And sorry, what was your first question, Leila?
Oh, it was just basically a comment if there's other trappers out there listening to make a complaint to the Forest Practice Board. At least that way it's documented. And once it's documented, there's no turning a blind eye to it. Yeah, and to add a little bit to that, when Wayne and Leila put in their Forest Practice Board complaint, that really made a significant difference, in my opinion, as to the awareness and the eyeballs on fissures. That level of action made a big difference in the concern level for fissures. Just so that was my notice on that. Yeah.
I'll just throw in too, everybody can keep watching your email. Our next Trapper webinar will be from the Forest Practices Board. So there are some other ongoing open investigations in the Forest Practices Board that will be of interest to trappers. And one of the talks will be about making complaints and that sort of stuff. So I've already kind of been in touch with them, and I expect within the next month or so, we'll have another webinar from the Forest Practices Board. So that's on our radar, and thanks for mentioning that, Leila, and everybody can pay attention to have. That'll be probably our next webinar we have.
I just wanted to mention one more thing. Rich, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, we missed the first fissure deal. We got turned around and we thought it was the night later. So is there any chance of getting any minutes or anything out of that, or do they not have anything recorded?
Tim, you recorded, didn't you?
No, technical errors on my part to not record that one, so I did not get that one recorded.
Okay, we'll just carry on from here then.
Yeah, if you want, I can give you a run through of the science stuff sometime. If there's enough interest for another webinar on that, Tim, just let me know, and I'm happy to run through it again.
Thanks again for your work, you guys.
Yes.
Thanks.
And if I could just add about the Forest Practices Board, just one more thing, Rich. That was one of the catalysts that really ended up with us getting fissure values actually in a forest stewardship plan, right? Along with some other things, but that was one of the reasons that the Caribou region is now legally required to retain fissure habitat as per our guidance in that region. So yeah, it's just an example of something, a tangible result from that sort of a complaint. So.
Okay, Greg, go ahead, and Dave Jenkins is on deck.
Yes, hello? Hello?
Hi.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Great. So I've been involved with people in town, they're the licensees for about 13 years, taking my referrals to them every time they come up, fighting for areas such as creeks, a no harvest on creeks, because they're allowed to harvest over creeks. Now they're giving me no harvest of 30 meters on each side of the creek and up to 50 meters. It took me 12 years to get that. And the reason I got that is because fissure go on this creeks out in my area. So anything that I really wanted, they wouldn't give to me for a fissure or the last meeting I went to, I wanted 3 blocks saved. They didn't give it to me because of fissure in the area and a wolverine in the area. So what I have found, as long as the government's legislated, they're not going to change what's going on out there. It doesn't matter if it's NDP, Liberal, or what have you. What it takes is somebody like me fighting every month or every week, being on the phone to get this stuff. There's nothing else out there. I even had the forest practice a board involved last year. They are useless. They never did nothing for me. So as long as the government's not going to change, you can come up with all these ideas of what we should do and what we shouldn't do, but they're not going to listen. All it has to do is jobs and money, as far as I can see. Like, I've been involved for a long time here. Migratory birds, they don't listen about that. Everything that I've tried, I've gone as far as I can to protect my area for fisher, wolverine, martin. So here we are, they're red listed. We're going to be banned from trapping. Why is the forest industry still doing what they're doing out there? If we're not allowed to trap these things in the future, the forest industry should be doing something to protect these animals, what's left of them. They're the ones that created this mess, most of it. Fires came along, well, that's a natural thing. But the forest industry created this mess. Government should get involved. There's no management of water out there, of wildlife. I'm managing the whole area. That's the problem. There's no management. Why should I have to manage my interests and everybody else's interests out there, such as moose, water? Why is the government allowed to log over creeks? Climate change is here. They shouldn't be doing that.
I agree. You know, there aren't any legal mechanisms currently in place for fishers or most wildlife, really. And so that for there to be real change, that needs to change. And I totally agree with you on that. It's, you know, we do, as you've probably heard us say, we do a lot of training for the forest industry, do a lot of, you know, provide guidance, and there are many foresters who are like super keen, want to do the right thing. But when they try to put a plan through, their woodlands manager says, no, is it legal? But they say, is it legally required? And it's not. And so they go, no, we don't need to worry about it. So, you know, that's frustrating to us because we want to see more habitat retained. I don't, there are some revisions to the Forest and Range Practices Act that are currently under process, I guess. I'm not too sure, but I'm not sure what the net effect of those will be for changing the habitat retention out there. We'll have to see, I guess.
Am I on? Hello?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, that's great, you know, but the thing is, it's not going to change as long as the government's not going to change. You can say these fish are red listed. The problem is what the government's doing out there. Like I said, there's no management of whatsoever out there. That's why we have a wildlife problem. That's why we have too many wolves in the area. Look at it. It's not a wolf problem. Government created this wolf a problem out there, and now it's not right because you get too many wolves. Well, what happened? Well, because we changed the whole landscape, access, and everything like that. That's why we're having these problems.
Greg, I'm going to cut you off. We're not here to bitch at the presenters tonight for the habitat loss. We all know that's the reason. We're here more to talk about how we can protect it. You know, it's not their fault that we're in that predicament. It's other people's that's at that point. So if we can keep it to questions specific to fisher and habitat, and we'll keep it on that topic for tonight, please.
Well, I understand, but that's what it's all about. It's about habitat. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Totally agree with you. I've always, and I think everyone who's on the Fisher team agrees that it's all habitat. That's the issue, and that is our hill where we're fighting on.
Dave Jenkins, go ahead, and Darcy's on deck.
Hey, Roy. Looking at the distribution of your data points, I can truly appreciate the sweat that you've left on those hillsides. Having spent a lifetime putting together large spatially distributed data sets, I can appreciate the effort that's gone into this. But I've also spent a lifetime in looking at data sets and their spatial distribution. And there's some beautiful data that you have there showing the home range of some of these female fishers and how it all fits together. And the distribution of your sampling shows how these females travel. But looking at your data set very, very quickly, I spotted a couple of anomalies that left me with some questions as to whether your data set, when collected in the field, has some standards and some blanks put into it so that you know what the answer should be at specific locations. And so that you can demonstrate that your lab can actually identify specific individuals. A couple of points that popped out at me. You had two fishers that show up in one location. There's a bunch of spots around it where you have sample locations. And then those same two fishers show up quite a long distance away. So you only got those two fishers twice, but they're very widely separated for the two locations. And it happened with both fishers at the same place. So my question is, do you have protocols in place to make sure that the samples do not get mixed up, either when you're sampling in a field or when they go into the lab?
Yeah, absolutely. So all of the samples that we collect have a unique, it doesn't matter. So there's 4 strips on each of those cubbies. Each of those samples, if each strip had hair on it, each of those strips would be placed into its own sample envelope with a unique number that's cataloged in our collector program. And when we send all that to the lab, we give them a spreadsheet which identifies the site and the session that sample was taken from. Again, each of those are uniquely ID'd. And then the lab in Nelson, Wildlife Genetics International, its founder and president is Dr. David Petkow. And he is basically the pioneer of this type of microsatellite analysis in our province. At least he started in the earlier mid-90s, but they did a lot of work with grizzly bears, hair snagging, and they've really refined that. They have a 3-stage error checking process when they're doing this analysis, and they're sequencing the mitochondrial 16S mRNA gene. And again, there's multiple error checking stages within the species identification stage, and then as well as the individual identification stage. So when samples don't amplify properly, then they're not included. And so the process itself is now quite well established. Earlier on, there were issues sometimes with errors in those identifications, but also given the fact that we now have reference data from fishers in BC, we have quite a large reference data set, and they actually house that whole data set. So the confidence that we have in identifying the individual fishers is high. I may have mislabeled some of the data points if they were like that, but I don't think so. Some of them would have been double labeled because they were detected at the same site twice over subsequent sessions. I don't think I filtered that out. So that may be where you saw some of that as well. The recapture pathways for the males can be quite large. We had one male, he covered, I don't know, his average distance between traps was like 8 kilometers or something. It was quite a long way. But yeah, no, in terms of the error checking process and and how confident we are in the individual identification of those animals, it's high.
Okay, I would question why the lab would need to know the location of the sample and which
So-
strips came from the same sample site. That would be an
Yep.
additional way of quality checking your data.
Mhm. And what they usually do is they'll pick, we limit it to one survey site per session, and they'll pick the best sample. So say there were 3 strips, and they'll take that one, and provided there's enough DNA on it, that's the animal that they would include. And the reason that we include the site location is actually not for the lab, that's for our subsequent analysis. So the way that how I analyze that data afterwards to generate a density, a Fisher density for our survey area, it relies on the location of where that animal was detected. So it uses actually it's the average recaptured distance. And so what the modeling does is you're able to model density, and then as well as detection probability and a spatial parameter, which is related to the size of the Fisher's home range. So we're not and using that detection probability, because we know that we're not always going to detect all animals perfectly every time, right? That's just not the way it's going to go. And so using those spatial locations is really how we're able to estimate that density over our survey area and the area of integration, and then from that get an actual number of Fishers, an estimate with some error for the survey area as well.
Well, you've done a wonderful job. I appreciate all the effort you put into it.
Thank you very much.
Personally, I would keep the specific location of each sample close to my chest and not give it to the lab. I learned a long time ago that labs get a benefit from cheating, and they do.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I don't think they actually know where the sample's from. It's just a site number. So
Yeah.
they wouldn't be able to say these two are close together or not. They're kind of, hopefully.
But if they know that 3 samples came from a particular site, then they know that the data from each one of those samples should be fairly equivocal.
Well, we actually hope they're not, because that means we have recaptures, which is what we're trying to achieve with the sampling. So if they're doing that doesn't help us.
That's it for me.
I'm muted. Darcy, go ahead, and Don Wilkins is next on deck. Sorry, Darcy, go ahead and unmute yourself there.
Yeah, I did. By the time we get to the question, I kind of forgot, but with regards to the Fisher, what I see, I guess they're red listed for sure. The concern I have is if you ban the trapping, the trappers are still going to be catching them. And the other situation is my trap line is more in the caribou habitat. It's quite high up. So I never catch any Fishers up high. And the only time I catch a Fisher is down low, and I haven't caught any. Well, I haven't owned that trap line for too awful long, 8 or 9 years, but only in the last 2 years, I've been catching a couple of Fishers. And my reason is that they logged the Bowen Valley completely out. Like, I don't want to get into the caribou habitat discussion, but they're logging the leftover trees that they left in the 70s and 80s. They're going back and cleaning them completely out. There's nothing left. And these Fishers, they only got a little strip like along the river. That's the only habitat they got left that I can see. And the other thing is they have these exclusion boxes. Well, that doesn't exclude a Fisher to go in a 280 box. And that's usually what I put down in the lower end of my trap line, because I have to travel 20 or 30 kilometers up into the mountains to trap marten. So if there's, the other question too is these where they do trap a lot of marten, the trappers should use these exclusion boxes, because they would obviously not, catch them. I don't know. So are they going to cancel? Are they canceling the trapping season for marten?
Well, we let
That's it for me.
Jared can answer that. He's the fur regulatory guy on the call, so I'm going to let Jared answer that one.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Well, certainly no plans to cancel any sort of marten trapping seasons right now, but the discussions around the exclusion boxes and that sort of stuff is ongoing, and I think you touched on some points there about sort of where is the best place to be using them and not, and that sort of stuff. So certainly ongoing discussions about that, but no plans to cancel marten seasons now.
No, I mean the fisher season.
Oh, is it being closed? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Oh, well, we're still in the midst of looking at that, right? Like, so just wrapping up consultation with First Nations on that, and I don't know if you had the talk last week, but it's the proposal to close the season is up on the public engagement website. So we're still comments coming in from that, and certainly the comments we've heard from others, and the BCTA executive will be put together in a package and then put forward to the decision maker for decision at sometime later this year probably.
Okay, actually myself, I'm Indigenous as myself, but don't qualify as First Nation. So that was the other issue is, some of the stuff I read, half the trap lines are owned by the First Nations and they're not even being used, a lot of them. And plus myself, I'm getting up in age and I'm not really a serious trapper. So I don't really go out there and spend a whole month of trapping. I go maybe a couple of weeks, and there's a lot of areas like my marten trapping this year. The price isn't there, so I didn't even go there. I just left them alone. And there's areas, other parts of my trap line that I don't use, and there's exclusion there as well, with regards for habitat, and because the trapper knows if he goes in and cleans out the whole area, he's got nothing for the next 10 years. And the other one of the other issues was when you fellows were up in Prince George, you talked about asking the trappers to go and identify these areas that for habitat. These logging companies are just finishing it off. There's nothing left in Prince George, and I don't even know where they're finding all these trees, but they're sure doing a good job. That's it for me.
Oh, muted. Okay, thanks, Darcy. Don, go ahead. Oh, sorry, Don. Go ahead. Mute yourself and go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just wondering whether or not you've had any indication about interior cedar hemlock stands. We have quite an interior cedar hemlock right from my area, just east of Prince George, all the way to McBride. And I'm wondering, I haven't seen a lot of Fisher sign in there, but I'm just wondering if they're used at all.
Yeah, that's a good observation. I think many other trappers will probably have noticed that. The interior cedar hemlock zone is an area we don't have any very good data on fishers for. And so we're not sure how widespread they are. They get trapped, certainly in the caribou, in some of the interior cedar hemlock stands towards, like Caribou Lake and Likely and Horseye Lake and Quesnel Lake and that area. They do get caught in some areas where it is that interior cedar hemlock. I'm not sure what it's like as you get further north, like kind of the Robson Valley or Lower Robson Valley, McGregor, that area, and also up into the Kispiox and areas kind of in the Smithers region. And so that's one of the areas where we're actually thinking we need to do a little bit more work, because we really don't have a good handle on what the fisher populations are like, how well fishers do there. Is it just males? How many times are females there? And so that's a really good question, Don. We just really don't know enough about what fishers do in the interior cedar hemlock areas.
Well, I would think that it would be an excellent area for denning. Some of those big hemlocks, all right, especially when they die, or some of the other trees that die in the midst of them, would have a large number of cavities. But at the same time, I see a real lack of food underneath. They're 130, 140 years old, and I'm just not sure. Even the marten are reduced in some of those areas. Yeah,
and I think for fishers, they don't do so well in the deep soft snow. And I think in some of those interior wet belt forests, the snow, they get big dumps of snow. I'm sure you've been on your snowmobile and had that. And it's just, I think the fishers just have a hard time making a go of it. But like I say, no one's done any work, and so we don't really know. What's the prey there? There seems to be a lot of good habitat stuff for fishers there, but maybe it's snow conditions, maybe there's not enough food, a whole bunch of things we sure would like to know more about.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't see any more hands up, so we'll say a last call for questions. I seen one difference in the presentation when the fisher in the Chilcotin to the Williston numbers and the male-female ratio from the marten that you identified in the male-female ratio in the fisher, and they were totally opposite. I think it was more female fisher than males, and then the marten was totally opposite the other way. I'm curious what your thoughts on that are.
I don't recall that. So, Roy, do you?
Yeah. So we had in the Williston, it was 21 males and 16 females. So not that different. In the Chilcotin, of course, males home ranges will typically overlap 2 or 3 or up to 2 or 3 female fishers. So that ratio, makes a lot more sense. Again, I haven't actually dived into much of the data yet for the marten, unfortunately, to see where exactly each one of those animals was detected and kind of what's going on. So some of them maybe they were just on the periphery of the grid where we got the males. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. Like I say, neither of us has had a chance to really dig into that marten data just yet.
Okay, Don raised your hand. Go ahead, Don. Another question?
Just one more point. With all the trappers who are willing to help in almost any way we can, do you see any opportunity for citizen science in here whereby you tell us where or something on our lines you want us to collect hair samples, and we can put these things up and monitor them weekly or whatever you want, and collect hair samples?
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, Don, and I think that is part of what we're looking for, trying to figure out with the mesocarnivore monitoring plan that Rory talked about a little bit earlier. Doing the kind of regional monitoring. We'd really love to have trappers help out with that, because you guys are out in your lines all the time, right? And you're going to places that nobody else is. and the opportunity to get information while you're out there would be just super helpful. I can't stress how useful that would be. So for sure, we'll definitely are looking forward to exploring that option, and we'll start. I think once the plan starts kind of gelling together, we'll start talking to some of the locals and see what we've got for options for doing that, because we're gonna have to figure out how we might do it before we come to you and say, hey, let's give this a go. So yeah, definitely a great idea, and I think that's something we'll be pursuing as we move forward on that monitoring plan.
And I see one question in the chat box that probably everybody would like to see the answer to. How many years of regenerating of logging does it, how long does it take, if it was logged in the 70s to the 90s, how long till Fisher can sustain Fisher again?
Well, it depends on how they logged it, really is the key. If they leave some residual structure in the stands when they're logging, it's realistically 20 years. You can have pretty decent Fisher habitat coming back. But not when you yard every stick to the landing and you cut it and you throw it on a truck or you burn it, and not if what is planted is all lodgepole pine. Fishers need, I always say there's this holy trinity of disease, death, and decay that fishers need in the forest that they live in. So you need to have trees that are old, trees that are decaying, and trees that have disease for fishers to be able to make a living there. And when a logging block goes in and they knock everything down and there's no advanced regen retained and there's no structure left in the block, yeah, they'll be covered in 20 years, but it's almost useless to fishers unless there's a lot of food in there. But because they need those old forest structures almost spread throughout their territory to survive and reproduce. And if those aren't there, they just won't live there. You can have miles and miles of regenerating cut block, and it's got enough cover, but if there's no trees to den in, the fisher's just not going to be there. So it really has to do with the structure that's retained, and that's why the focus of the work that we do with the licensees is saying, look, just don't cut this down, leave it there. You're just going to knock it down and put it in a burn pile anyway. So just leave it standing and leave some more debris. And yeah, the cut blocks look messy, but that's way better for the animals than if it's scraped clean and burned and distrenched and site prep to the nines. That's really the stress that we're making with the licensees. So yeah, it is all about the retention of the structures within the blocks. That's what makes the big difference.
Can you go a little bit more into that? And I only say that for the benefit of everybody else. I just had a referral sent to me and I said something of that nature to him about coarse woody debris left. And first thing I got back was we have a limit of what we can leave. How do we deal with that when we send back a referral, when we send something back?
That's a bit disingenuous, I think, by the licensee. They can retain coarse weighted debris within cut blocks. They just need to have it in their site plans and their forest stewardship plan. That is what they're doing it for. Otherwise, it looks like wastage. It looks like they're just wasting wood, right? And they get billed for that for sure. But our experience so far has been that as long as they actually say they're going to do it before they log it, they can actually leave quite a bit. And that it is a battle with certainly with some operators about leaving things in the block. They don't want to leave fiber in the block sometimes. Sometimes the contractors just don't want to be bothered having to do things differently than they've been doing for the past 20 or 30 years. And so there's a bunch of different things that kind of happen there. And it is a challenge. And I think we're getting to the point where, with fishers, they're gonna have to do it. Otherwise they're not going to be logging. Is kind of, if things get so bad with fishers, that's going to be what the outcome is. So their choice really is do a better job now and still get the log, or do a shit job now and not have anything to log in 10 years. Who knows, that might be what they choose. But that's kind of, I think, where we're kind of, what we're realizing is that that's the point at which the decisions are being made.
Okay. Well, thanks, Rich. Thanks, Rory, for your time tonight. Not seeing anybody else throwing their hand up, so I think we'll call it an evening. We thanks for your time. We thanks for the information, and thanks for your hard work and efforts to try to give us the tools we need to fight this battle too. And I think in the closing, I'll leave it to everybody else that, as Jared had said, yes, the government website is open for comment on closing Fisher trapping this year. And I think that's our opportunity to, every one of us as a trap, you know, the BCTA will definitely do their formal response, but every trapper needs to make a response, needs to put your input in there and, you know, make it known that, yes, we don't want to trap red listed species, but I think we also to make it very known that other things have to change. Forestry has to change, and forestry has to change now, not tomorrow. And make those comments known. If we don't take our opportunity or time to make those comments, we won't see change. We have to bark and complain and make it known that you know, we've been fighting this battle for a long time, and we keep getting the scapegoat for it, and nobody else is paying the price. So we have to take that chance to do it. So, any last remarks from Rich or Rory before I sign off?
I just say thanks a lot for the opportunity to talk. I always like getting a chance to talk with trappers. So and feel free to contact me or Rory or Scott or Jared if you have any questions or you have some things you want to chat about. We're always happy to talk to trappers.
Yeah, and I would also just echo that. I really appreciate you guys having us all on here to share some information that we've gathered, and also to get feedback from all of you who are out there on the land working with those animals. So thanks.
Okay, thanks everyone. Have a great night.